Research Center of the Joint Research Center of the Università Cattolica, Tax Justice Network, and the Government Transparency Institute. So this project is going to, as we will see, create awareness, knowledge, generate, improve the knowledge on the issue of beneficial ownership transparency. And the main beneficiary of the whole project is the civil society as a whole, where under this umbrella we put NGOs, watchdogs, investigative journalists, academics, labor parties, and other representatives of the civil society. What are the objectives of CSABOT? So next slide, please. Okay, next. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So the objective of Project CSABOT is first, doing trainings on this topic in 7 European countries. Second, organizing local events to generate awareness in other European countries. And having a closing event to disseminate the key aims and results of the project. CSABOT has also established a network of experts to engage in the discussion on new measures for ensuring better and greater beneficial ownership transparency. We had just yesterday a meeting of the network of experts, which groups academics, researchers, NGOs, but also representative of public authorities, of business registers, of banking federation, of professionals, and so on. So as to discuss how to improve the transparency of beneficial ownership. And also as a fifth objective, we will develop a public database, which will include information on beneficial ownership. This is not really, a bioregistry. It's just a repository of initiatives, links, documents, reports, data to some extent regarding beneficial ownership transparency. So it will be, the benchmark, the main contact point for anyone willing to increase his knowledge on beneficial ownership and can go to this repository and database and collect what is needed. Now, we are today on the first objective, which is the training. So if we can go next slide, please. What are the objective, the people involved and in the training? So the objective, as said, is to give you a very operational knowledge on how to use in an effective way beneficial ownership information in order to improve the transparency of the financial and corporate domain, and also prevent, and I would say also early detect financial crimes. Financial crimes at large, money laundering, corruption, fraud, tax evasion, competition issues, cartels, and so on. The second is to strengthen the ability of you as civil society actors to understand how to use effectively this information. And therefore, as said, the training is targeted to a wider audience in terms of civil society. And I think that we have all these categories represented today in the audience. And after this short introduction, we will give the floor to you in order you can introduce yourself. And so as we know who is in the room, albeit this is a virtual room. As said, France is one of the 7 countries. The other 2 countries are Germany and the Czech Republic. But then we have also Greece, Ireland, Italy, and Portugal, in which we will carry out the trainings in the next few weeks and months. So next slide, please. What are the issues, the thematic domains that we will address during the training? So there are 4. The first is to look at the national and international AML, so anti-money laundering and countering financial crime policies, in particular those which refer to the beneficial ownership transparency. And in doing that, we will also understand how this regulation fits with the current risks that are related to beneficial ownership transparency. And all this will be reflected in the agenda, which I will illustrate next. The second thematic area is about the role, organization, and functioning of beneficial ownership registers, of course, in France, but also in a comparative way, also in other European member states and beyond the EU as a whole. And then we will go to very concrete and tangible and operational thematic areas: how to collect biodata, how to verify biodata, how to assess the quality of biodata, how to use biodata for your purposes. And so we will have also a number of trainings and exercises and assignments to do this concretely. And finally, number 4, it's a networking issue. It's about what are the cooperation and networking tools which are around out there and on which you can rely in order to improve your work. As said, these 4 thematic areas will be reflected in the agenda of the training, which I'm going to illustrate next. So please, next slide. So this is the first day. So the first day, after this introduction by me and Sarah Brimberg, we will have a slot managed by Caterina Paternoster from Transcrime about what are the risk, the threat, and the issue, the wider context on beneficial ownership transparency with regards money laundering. Then we will have a break, and after we will have an introduction to the regulatory framework on beneficial ownership and bioregisters by Lucas Millian and Sophie Lemaitre. And you can see already from the selection of the speakers that we will always try to, have a more international dimension and a very local, in this case, French dimension, because the objective of the training is to somehow, be local in the sense of addressing the needs that you have locally, but at the same time putting them in a wider context. So as you can really compare to what other countries do, to what neighbors do, and to what other experiences beyond you do. Then we will have, so please next slide. Then we will have another session by Mayra Martini and Sarah on the beneficial ownership register. So as we will have a comparison of how they work, what are the type of information and functions. And finally, an exercise, it's a practical assignment by Sarah on exactly how to access and use the registry of beneficial owners with specific reference to France. We will have a wrap up to conclude day 1, and then we will go to day 2. So next slide. Okay. So day 2 will start with a summary of day 1 by Sarah. Then we will go to the verification of information on beneficial owner by Lucas Millian and Alexander Brutel, followed by a group work, travail de groupe, exactly on this topic. So we will work closely on how to verify in a practical way. Then we will have a session by Carlotta on, after verifying information, how to use information. Process them in a number of ways so as to highlight, detect the risk, highlight anomalies in certain situations, which will be followed by group work again. So next slide. A group work again by Carlotta and Caterina on analyzing the information concerning beneficial ownership and corporate ownership at large. So just a premise, we will talk a lot about beneficial ownership, but we will say that is also relevant to look at other corporate information, corporate ownership information. We will have to look at the ownership structure of firms at large in order to detect anomalies. And finally, we'll conclude with a session by Lucas Millian and Atanas Shobanov on existing networks, tools, and opportunities for cooperation and networking in this area. So as you see, it's a very rich and dense agenda, combining local perspective, international perspective. We had, by definition and by mandate of the Commission, to keep somehow a EU hat, but we will try to put it on a nice French dress, which we all know that are the best dresses that one can find. I'm saying as Italian, so you have to believe me. But in order to make this very, very working. So please be interactive during all the session. There are sessions for Q&A, but please intervene as soon as you have comments, questions, in order to make it as we were all there, okay? So I leave the floor now to Sarah, so as she can put in the French context, and then we'll have a tour de table so as you can introduce yourself from the audience part. Thank you, and Sarah, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Michele, merci beaucoup. Alors, en effet, la première question est celle qui, finalement, est la genèse de cette formation. Pourquoi une formation sur la transparence de la propriété effective en France? Bon, pour beaucoup de raisons. D'abord, parce que, en fait, ce sujet, la transparence des informations sur les bénéficiaires effectifs, c'est une donnée cruciale pour travailler, pour lutter contre la corruption, lutter contre le blanchiment, lutter contre la fraude, l'évasion fiscale, lutter de manière plus largement contre les flux financiers illicites. Puisque la transparence de la propriété effective permet de connaître la personne physique, c'est-à-dire l'être humain qui se cache derrière les structures juridiques, qu'il s'agisse de sociétés, de trusts, qui interviennent dans la quasi-totalité, en tout cas la majorité des schémas de blanchiment, des schémas de corruption ou des schémas de fraude, d'évasion fiscale. Il y a quelques chiffres qui sont extrêmement parlants. Selon la Banque mondiale, par exemple, ces 30 dernières années, 70% des affaires de corruption ont impliqué des sociétés écrans anonymes. Donc, voilà, on est sur vraiment un schéma qui se répète, qui est évidemment qui n'a de limite que l'imagination des corrupteurs, des blanchisseurs, et la complexité, c'est chaque jour un petit peu plus complexe à mesure que les moyens des autorités de poursuite et à mesure que la transparence s'intensifie, eh bien, les criminels, les blanchisseurs, les corrupteurs s'adaptent. Donc, c'est important de suivre ce rythme et de permettre, de permettre que chacun ait accès à ces outils, les comprenne, puisse les utiliser et éventuellement les améliorer. Puisque nous avons en France un registre sur les bénéficiaires effectifs depuis plus de 5 ans. Il a été créé en 2017. C'était une transposition d'une directive européenne et les prochains intervenants vous en diront plus. Donc, il existe depuis 2017. Il est ouvert au public depuis 2021, un peu plus d'1 an. C'était au printemps 2021. Et c'est la première fois donc, qu'on a accès à ces informations en France. Les experts, les praticiens, les activistes commencent à utiliser ces données, à les travailler, puisque quand on demande la transparence, il faut pouvoir l'utiliser, sinon on risque de ne pas d'obtenir la transparence que l'on demande sur autre chose par la suite. Et ça permet également d'avoir accès à des résultats qui sont extrêmement intéressants. Si on fait un parallèle avec ce qui s'est passé au Luxembourg, qui a un registre des bénéficiaires effectifs également, et on retombe sur l'enquête OpenLux qui est sortie il y a un petit peu plus d'1 an et qui a permis finalement de connaître énormément d'informations, voire de relancer des procès, relancer des enquêtes en cours, voire d'en lancer. Alors, le but de cette formation, et je vais être assez rapide pour laisser ensuite la parole à ma collègue Caterina, c'est sensibiliser, puisque moi, je travaille sur cette question depuis quelques années et je me rends compte qu'il y a très peu de littérature sur la transparence des bénéficiaires effectifs. Il y a la seule littérature que je trouvais, c'était de la littérature de conformité, donc pour accompagner les personnes physiques et les personnes morales qui doivent déclarer leurs bénéficiaires effectifs, les accompagner dans leur obligation de déclaration. Donc, c'est très, très bien, mais on prenait peu de recul, on était beaucoup sur une logique d'exécution, de conformité, et il n'y avait pas forcément de recul sur les enjeux du registre, la question de la vérification, de quels moyens disposent les autorités françaises pour vérifier ces informations. Aujourd'hui, c'est les greffiers des tribunaux de commerce qui mènent cette vérification. Je n'ai pas lu de chiffres officiels, de rapports sur les moyens dont ils disposent. Est-ce qu'ils sont assez dotés? Comment mènent-ils ces vérifications? Combien de vérifications sont menées chaque année? Combien d'entités ou de personnes physiques sont sanctionnées pour manquement à leur obligation de déclaration? Est-ce que les sanctions sont dissuasives? Voilà, toutes ces données un petit peu plus macro, cette réflexion de contexte, je ne l'ai pas trouvée en France. Elle existe pour d'autres pays et le sujet est un petit peu plus, disons, un peu mieux abordé, en tout cas de manière un petit peu plus large dans les pays anglo-saxons. Donc, c'était sensibiliser à l'outil et permettre en fait à un public soit qui a accès et qui connaît, mais également à des novices en la matière, de les sensibiliser à l'outil, de les familiariser, puisqu'il s'agit d'un outil, comme je viens de le dire. Donc, ça nécessite de se familiariser avec son utilisation, comment on accède au registre, comment est-ce que ça marche, est-ce qu'il y a des tips à savoir, voilà, et comment faire des recherches plus efficientes et comment se débrouiller en fait dans ce nouvel écosystème qui existe assez récemment et qui est ouvert au public de manière encore plus récente, et échanger. Et là, je retourne sur ce que disait Michele. Le but, c'est de créer, non pas forcément un réseau ou quelque chose de très informel, mais voilà, on est tous ensemble dans cette formation virtuelle sur les 2 prochains jours. On a tous un profil différent, un background différent. Le but, c'est d'échanger et d'avoir peut-être différents points de vue sur cette question, que ce soit les juristes, les économistes, les universitaires, la société civile, les journalistes, voire les agents publics, ceux qui travaillent dans les autorités de régulation, les autorités de contrôle, qu'ils puissent avoir ces échanges de manière très informelle, de manière très fluide. Donc, le but, c'est vraiment voilà, de faire, malgré la plateforme virtuelle qui peut peut-être enlever un peu le dynamisme et la spontanéité, de faire quelque chose de parlant et de créer un dialogue. Donc, sensibiliser, je revenais, voilà, donc là, je reviens sur ce que j'ai dit, mais quelle utilisation pour les organisations de la société civile, puisque c'est de ça dont il s'agit. Le registre est accessible aux autorités de poursuite et aux professionnels assujettis, ainsi qu'aux entreprises sujettes à l'obligation de déclaration depuis 2017. Mais la société civile, le grand public, n'y a accès que depuis un peu plus d'1 an. Donc, ça pose la question de son utilisation. Et est-ce qu'on pourrait faire un open luxe à la française, peut-être, en croisant ce registre avec différents registres existants. Donc, nous en parlerons dans les prochaines sessions. Voilà, je vais me familiariser comment fonctionne le registre, donc j'en ai déjà parlé. Et je finis sur échanger et dialoguer. Nous souhaitons également répondre à vos attentes. Donc, là, je vais laisser la parole à Caterina, mais nous pouvons avoir un petit échange un petit peu plus fluide où on pourra peut-être faire un tour de table, que chacun se présente, qui il est, d'où il vient et ce qu'il attend de cette formation. On pourra le faire, je pense, à la fin de la formation de Caterina ou au début de la prochaine. Voilà, on arrive il est bientôt 9h30, 9h26. Donc, je vais laisser la parole à Caterina. Voilà.
Sarah, I think that, knowing Katerina very well, I know she will be able also to squeeze a bit presentation and keep the same. So I would suggest, if you don't mind, to do the round the table now, so as we immediately know who is around this virtual table.
D'accord, ok. Très bonne idée, excellente idée. Je commence alors, donc je commence et je passerai la parole à Michele et ensuite on défilera selon l'ordre d'apparition sur l'écran. Donc, je m'appelle Sarah Brimbeuf, je travaille au sein de l'ONG française, la section française de Transparence internationale depuis bientôt 4 ans. Et je suis responsable du programme flux financiers illicites. Donc, je travaille sur la question des bénéficiaires effectifs, mais pas seulement, sur les questions de blanchiment, de corruption transnationale et de recouvrement des avoirs. Donc, tout ça, finalement, fait un écosystème assez cohérent et on y revient toujours, en fait, à qui sont derrière les sociétés écrans. Je laisse la parole à Michele, puis ensuite, je défilerai selon l'ordre d'apparition sur mon écran.
Thank you. Very quickly, I'm Michele Riccardi, Deputy Director of Transcrime, so involved in the project. You already knew me. Please, Caterina, present yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Caterina Paternoster. I'm a PhD student in criminology at the Università Cattolica of Milan and a junior researcher at Transcrime. And today we will begin this first day of training together. Thank you.
Next one is Shione.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Shona Jones. I'm Director of Operations and Communications at the Tax Justice Network. I'm really looking forward to listening and learning more about the French Beneficial Ownership Register and the work that you're all doing. Thank you.
Pietro Leone.
Hi, I'm Pietro Leone Giauna. I'm a graduate student at the Paris School of Economics, and I am a research assistant at the EU Tax Observatory.
Merci. Alors,
Nice
Iman,
to meet you all.
Iman, je ne sais pas si vous nous entendez, sinon je passe à la prochaine. Donc, j'ai Carlotta Carbone.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Carlotta Carbone, postdoctoral research fellow at Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore of Milan and researcher at Transcrime. And I'm also involved in the CSABOT project.
Merci. Et j'ai Jean-Charles Grand. Bonjour Jean-Charles.
Bonjour à tous, je vais peut-être me présenter en anglais. So hi everyone, so my name is Jean-Charles Grand, I'm French. I'm currently doing a PhD in finance. I have also a degree in criminology, and I've been working in risk management in banks and insurance companies for about 8 years, and including in a compliance issue. And I'm here because we had a conversation with Sarah, and she thought my experience could be interesting for this meeting.
Merci beaucoup. Colline Emel.
Hi, I'm French. I'm Colline Emel. I'm a journalist. I'm working for Swiss and French media called Gotham City. And we do articles about financial crimes, so money laundering, corruption, fraud. And we are very interested in open data since all our articles are based on public information. So I'm really glad to be here.
Merci beaucoup. Ségal. Alors, je crois qu'on ne vous entend pas. On ne t'entend pas, pardon.
Est-ce que c'est bon maintenant?
Oui, c'est bon. Oui, merci.
Ok. Donc, je suis doctorant en économie en 3e année du département d'économie à Sciences Po. Et voilà, donc je m'intéresse aux questions de fiscalité, d'évasion fiscale. Et donc, par ce biais-là, je m'intéresse aux questions de la propriété effective. Et
donc, je suis Alice Yocchetti, je suis doctorante à l'École d'économie de Paris et je travaille aussi sur ces enjeux d'évasion fiscale. Merci.
Très bien, merci beaucoup. Gladys Olim, vous êtes la suivante sur l'écran.
Bonjour, moi je suis Gladys, je travaille dans le groupe ADP, je suis chargée de communication éthique et compliance, donc tout ce qui est blanchiment, corruption, on travaille dessus. Donc cette formation est très intéressante et sera enrichissante pour nous, pour après. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup. Elia Lavalade, vous êtes le prochain.
Hi everyone, so my name is Elia Lavalade Benfredge and I'm working for 1 year now, at a French anti-corruption agency based in Paris. And I have an experience before that of risk management at a consulting cabinet, which is KPMG, and that's for me.
Merci beaucoup. Giulia Librandi. Alors, c'est Julia. Oui, oui.
So, I'm Julia. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the EU Tax Observatory. I mainly work on tax evasion and tax avoidance, and we're going to start a project on shell companies. So we are very interested in knowing how to use this data. Thank you very much for organizing this.
Merci beaucoup. Florence Duo.
Hi everyone. My name is Florence Duo. I'm an inspector at the Anti-Corruption French Agency.
Merci. Francis Despernay. Alors, si Francis nous entend, oui, je crois qu'il a déjà activé son son. Francis, je crois qu'on ne vous entend pas. Alors, je passe juste à Véronique Magnier, puis on pourra revenir dans un instant.
Thank you, Sarah. My name is Véronique Magnier. I'm professor of law at Paris-Saclay University in France, and I am on the board of Transparency International France since 2014. And my field of research is specifically corruption and private companies. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Véronique. J'ai Thibaut Verdicchio juste après vous.
Oui, bonjour. Désolé, je suis arrivé super en retard, mais j'espère que je vais rattraper les wagons. Je suis juriste chez Action contre la faim et j'ai eu vent de la réunion, enfin de la formation et de la présentation d'aujourd'hui assez récemment. Donc, j'attends surtout de voir si les questions que vous allez traiter nous concernent vraiment nous en tant qu'ONG, parce qu'on a des contentieux en cours, mais peut-être qu'on pourra en parler plus en détail plus tard sur la notion de bénéficiaires finaux, vraiment, des aides versées par les ONG. Voilà.
Avec plaisir, merci beaucoup. Oui, en effet, c'est une question très intéressante, on pourra y revenir. N'hésitez pas si elle n'est pas traitée, puisque c'est une question un peu de niche, enfin, c'est vraiment pour les ONG de développement, mais je trouve que c'est important qu'on la traite, donc voilà, n'hésitez pas à la mentionner au besoin. Alors, j'ai Jeanne Baumard après vous.
Ouais. Donc, Jeanne Baumard, je suis doctorante à l'École d'économie de Paris. Et comme Ségal et Alice, juste avant, on travaille ensemble, je travaille sur des questions d'évasion fiscale. Et donc, c'était surtout pour voir éventuellement si on pouvait accéder à ces données en tant qu'académique et ce qu'on pouvait en faire et comment on pouvait travailler dessus et quelles questions on pouvait traiter à partir de ces données-ci.
Merci beaucoup. Caroline Correa. Alors, sinon, on peut passer à Lison Rebinder, juste après Caroline.
Bonjour, désolée, je suis arrivée en retard aussi. Je suis Lison Rebinder, je travaille au CCF des Terres solidaires sur les questions de fraude et d'évasion fiscale et je coordonne la plateforme paradis fiscaux et judiciaires qui rassemble les ONG et syndicats en France mobilisés sur les questions de lutte contre l'évasion fiscale. Et on travaille avec Sarah sur le plaidoyer sur les registres des bénéficiaires effectifs.
Bonjour Lison. Nadège Buquet, tu es juste après.
La déléguée générale de Transparence International France. J'en profite simplement pour remercier à la fois l'ensemble des panélistes qui vont œuvrer sur ces 2 jours, saluer le travail extrêmement conséquent qui a été fait pour préparer tout ce contenu et travail qui va être fait encore une fois aujourd'hui et demain. Et merci à chacun. J'espère sincèrement que ces 2 jours apporteront réponse à vos questions. Et encore une fois, Sarah l'a dit, Michele également, n'hésitez pas surtout à intervenir, même dans le chat, pour que ces 2 jours soient les plus interactifs possibles. Voilà, très bon travail à tous.
Merci beaucoup Nadège. Éric Margalet.
Oui, bonjour à toutes et tous. Éric Margalet Orange. Je travaille à la compliance du groupe Orange et je suis en charge des due diligence de fusion-acquisition. Et donc pour nous, c'est absolument crucial de bien maîtriser ce concept de bénéficiaire effectif.
Merci beaucoup. Alors je crois que j'ai passé tout le monde. Si peut-être Iman et Caroline sont parmi nous.
Oui, bonjour. Je suis navrée, j'avais un souci avec mon micro. Alors du coup, moi je suis juriste en compliance chez Siller Luxotica. Je traite sur toutes les thématiques d'éthique et compliance en tant que telle. Je ne suis pas trop sur les sujets de données perso, mais voilà, c'est vraiment dans la mise en place de procédures internes, de conformité, c'est-à-dire de mettre en place les 8 programmes de conformité de la loi Sapin 2 et de respecter également toutes les autres réglementations en vigueur. Mais voilà, c'est vraiment essayer d'implémenter et de mettre en place un réseau de conformité, de structurer en fait ce sujet qui parfois peut paraître un peu nouveau ou peut-être pas comment dire, au cœur de tous les sujets. Donc voilà, donc, la conformité, ça parle ou ça parle pas. Et en fait, on essaie vraiment chez Siller Luxotica de communiquer un maximum là-dessus et de mettre en place différentes procédures et différents moyens afin d'y accéder.
Merci beaucoup. Est-ce que j'ai oublié quelqu'un dans le tour de table? N'hésitez pas à prendre la parole et puis comme ça, nous pourrons ensuite, voilà, dans quelques instants, passer à la présentation de Caterina.
Caroline is missing probably.
Oui. Est-ce que Caroline est parmi nous? Ah, bonjour.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. I will share my presentation. Okay, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, hello everyone. As said before, I'm Caterina Paternoster, and today together we will begin this first day of training together, dealing with a session on money laundering, anti-money laundering, and beneficial ownership transparency in Europe. Specifically, together, we will address the issue of the identification of the beneficial owners and of the importance of analyze data related to the entire ownership structure while looking at companies potentially involved in financial crimes. In doing it, we will investigate these aspects starting from practical examples retrieved by judicial cases and media investigations. So please, if you have a comment or question, write them down and we will answer them at the end of this presentation. Well, the training that you are attending these days basically aims at providing you a way to understand and use beneficial and legal ownership information in the fight against money laundering and other financial crimes. So the first things to do is to understand who a beneficial owner is. And these few lines that you are seeing in the slides are retrieved by the 4th Anti-Money Laundering Directive, as amended by the 5th, which gives a definition of beneficial owners for companies and other legal entities. This is not the entire definition provided by the directive, but clearly help us to understand in general who the beneficial owner is. So the European Union identifies as beneficial owner any natural person who ultimately owns or controls the customer and or the natural person on whose behalf a transaction or activity is being conducted. So from this short definition, we understand that the beneficial owner needs to be always a natural person, so not a company, for example, and that the beneficial owner is the natural person that controls a company and benefits from its control. And in practice, however, the definition and the identification of the beneficial owner may be a quite complex task, and this for several reasons. First, to date, there is no globally adopted definition of a beneficial owner, and we can find different definitions both at the supranational and national level. In addition, also in the same regulatory framework, we can find different approaches for the identification of the beneficial owner, also considering the type of legal entities analyzed. However, all these issues will be widely addressed in the following session. However, only to give you an example, in the image on the left, you can see that there is a company B, and in this case, the beneficial owner is Carol, while company C can be defined as the first level shareholder, while company D can be defined as the second level shareholder, and more in general, company C and company D can be defined as intermediate shareholder. Okay, but why should be relevant to identify the beneficial owner of a company, and why this topic has become so relevant and so central in the debate on money laundering and financial crime in the last years? Well, as demonstrated by previous investigation and research, criminal organizations frequently misuse legal vehicles to commit or to facilitate the commission of financial crimes. So money laundering, for example, those reinvesting illicit proceeds in the legal economy, tax evasion, also exploiting secrecy or offshore jurisdiction, but also corruption and collusion and other financial crimes. Therefore, to commit this crime by exploiting legal vehicles in the legal economy, criminals adopt several techniques to conceal their identity. For example, in the image on the right, we can see that Mr. Smith is the owner of company A, but at the same time is involved in the trafficking of marijuana. So to conceal his identity and the origin of his profits, Mr. Smith employ an array of techniques that allow him to not be immediately identified as the beneficial owner of company A and to launder his money exploiting these companies. So given the evidence provided in the last years on the misuse of legal vehicles for illicit purposes, the identification of the beneficial owner and more in general, the announcement of corporate transparency has become a central measure in the anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing. And this has led to the adoption of several standards and regulation and measures, and probably the most relevant one is the adoption of beneficial ownership registers. And during this day, as said before by Sarah, you will have the opportunity to surf the French register and learn how to use it. As said before, recent scandals and investigation have played a central role in the promotion of beneficial ownership transparency, and especially thanks to the work conducted by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, which is an independent global network of hundreds of investigative journalists working, among others, also on financial crimes. And all of these famous investigations conducted by this consortium, for example, Panama Papers, the more recent Pandora Papers, Luxembourg Leaks, basically are all investigations about corporate anonymity and on the misuse of offshore jurisdiction to hide profits. We can think, for example, at the case of the Panamanian Mossack Fonseca, which was a law firm and corporate service provider at the center of the Panama Papers. That was a leak of hundreds of confidential documents from this law firm. And from these leaks emerged that Mossack Fonseca was one of the most important wholesaler of offshore secrecy, being active in more than 20 secrecy jurisdictions. Indeed, Mossack Fonseca basically incorporated companies in this offshore jurisdiction on the behalf of its clients, those acting, we can say, as a nominee shareholder or director. And so it's possible to understand that this type of practice pose a challenge for the identification of the real beneficial owner, since this practice do not require the real beneficial owner to disclose his identity. Although, however, these cases born as journalistic investigations, they had several effect. An immediate one, since in these cases were involved several politicians and relevant relevant individuals, and so this led in some cases to resignation from political offices and to protests in different parts of the globe. However, probably the most important effect was the long-term effect of boosting the awareness on the risk posed by corporate anonymity. Indeed, since the first scandals, several countries, including also the member states of European Union, made a commitment for the establishment of beneficial ownership registers and money in general for the enhancement of corporate transparency. So, along with these scandals, recent investigations conducted by law enforcement, but also academic research helped in shedding lights on the trends in the misuse of corporate vehicles in financial crime schemes, and also on the recurrent patterns that are employed to conceal the identity of the beneficial owner. Indeed, the analysis of these judicial cases and the review of the literature may allow us to identify recurrent anomalies employed in financial crime schemes that in turn may be used as red flags for the identification of companies at higher risk of being involved in financial crime schemes. For example, from this investigation, a first trend emerging is the increase in the misuse of legal entities for illicit purposes. Indeed, for example, in its last threat assessment on serious and organized crime, Europol highlighted that more than 80% of criminal networks today exploited legal vehicles to commit crimes, and that this percentage is increased in the last years. So, in the exploitation of these legal vehicles, as said before, criminals frequently employ some strategies to facilitate the concealment of the identity of the beneficial owner that can be detected by looking at the full ownership structure of these companies. For example, one of these practices is the employment of complex ownership structures that are frequently characterized by long chain of legal vehicles that are frequently registered in high-risk jurisdiction, those also with a cross-border nature. When we talk about high-risk jurisdiction, if we adopt an institutional approach, I would say, we refer to those countries that allowing a certain degree of financial and corporate secrecy are included in official black and gray lists elaborated by institutions such as the European Union, but also the FATF for money laundering or tax in the money laundering or tax domain. So, for example, this aspect has been investigated by the project Datacross, that was a project founded by the European Union and coordinated by Transcrime, whose aim was basically to investigate the specific risks related to European companies, detecting these anomalies by looking at the entire ownership structures of these entities. In this respect, Project Datacross found that the 1% of limited companies registered in Europe shows ownership links with companies included in official black and gray lists, and that this percentage is much higher for specific countries, for example, for Luxembourg, in which the 9% of companies have shareholders from blacklisted countries. Another practice is, however, that is frequently employed in financial crime schemes is the employment of opaque corporate vehicles that may do not allow the identification of the beneficial owner. So, for example, trust, fiduciaries, investment funds, but also shell companies. So incorporated companies with no independent operation, with no business activity or employees. So we could say dormant companies. In this respect, as said before also by Sarah, World Bank estimated in a study of 2011 that the 70% of the corruption cases analyzed by World Bank involved the employment of shell companies, while Project Datacross found that the 1.2% of European limited companies are controlled using trust, fiduciaries, and other legal arrangements. Also, in this case, we can find different percentage and use of this type of legal arrangement in different countries. And in this sense, Netherlands, for example, show that the 25% of limited companies registered in the countries are controlled using this type of vehicles. So in the following slides, we will see some examples and some judicial cases in which the failure in the identification of the beneficial owner has facilitated the commission of financial crimes. So the first case study is about the bank, the Danish bank failure in complying the anti-money laundering legislation, and which is about a Danish bank and financial institution that laundered more than $600 million between 2017 and 2018. And the authorities basically found that the bank did not comply with anti-money laundering regulation in conducting its due diligence activities that are basically activities conducted to analyze and mitigate the risk related to a client. So starting from this judicial investigation, the Danish media Børsen tried to identify who were the beneficial owner of the client at higher risk of the bank, and finding that many of them were under investigation for money laundering in their country of origin, those basically demonstrating the ineffectiveness of these anti-money laundering controls. And in particular, among the beneficial owners identified by Børsen, there were 3 Russian billionaires doing businesses with a close associate of a high-level politically exposed person that was connected to several offshore companies. Interestingly, one of these 3 billionaires financially supported a political activist who was jailed for conspiring to infiltrate the conservative US political group, sorry. And in general, these 3 individuals controlled and owned a company in a Danish company through another company that was registered in Cyprus, that in turn was owned by another company that was registered in Bahamas. So there was also this exposure to foreign and also high-risk jurisdiction. Another beneficial owner that was identified was an Italian-Nigerian entrepreneur doing business in the oil African oil industry that was previously investigated for tax evasion and money laundering in Italy. And also in this case, this person owned a company that showing a very complex ownership structure that was used also to hold some assets, including some private aircrafts. So from this case, it's possible to highlight how important it is, especially when conducting anti-money laundering controls, to clearly identify who is the beneficial owner. The following case, on the other hand, is about a conflict of interest involving a high-level politically exposed person from Czech Republic that was detected and investigated by Transparency International. As you probably better address in the following sessions, politically exposed persons are persons that, due to their prominent position and influence, are at higher risk of being involved in bribery, corruption, and other financial crimes. So, for example, members of legislative bodies, government ministers, and so on. In this case, the politically exposed person was the Prime Minister of Czech Republic. In this case, Transparency International found basically that the Prime Minister, that in the image is called Robert, was the beneficial owner of two trusts, Trust A and Trust B, that in turn owned several companies registered in Czech Republic. However, beside this, the Prime Minister was at the same time involved in some decision regarding the distribution of European funds that were direct also to some of these companies that the politically exposed person indirectly owned through this complex network of companies. So considering his role, the Prime Minister was clearly involved in a conflict of interest. And the Prime Minister exploited, on the one hand, this complex network of companies to conceal his identity, also employing these opaque corporate vehicles that do not allow the identification of the beneficial owner. And on the other hand, he exploited his power to unlawfully benefit from European funds through owning these companies. And more recently, Pandora Papers also revealed that the prime ministers apparently used offshore companies in the British Virgin Islands to conceal his identity in the buying of a French mansion worth $1 million. So considering what we have said so far, but and in light of also of these two case studies, we can see that the need to identify who control and who is the beneficial owner of a company is strictly related to the need of looking at the full ownership structures of these companies, thus using data also at different level in the ownership chain. This is relevant for several reasons, but especially as emerged from these cases, because the information on the ownership structure may allow us the identification of entities at higher risk of being involved in financial crime schemes. So in this sense, it is not only relevant to identify who owns a company, but also how his exercise this control, and also through which legal vehicles. Indeed, as said before, in financial crime schemes, there are recurrent practices and strategies employed by criminals to conceal that their identities that can be early detected if looking at the entire ownership structure. However, to do it, as said before also by Michele, it is not possible to rely only on the information on the identity of the beneficial owner, but it's necessary to look at the information also at the other level of ownership. Indeed, in looking at this information, we can spot some of the red flags that we have mentioned also before. So a high degree of complexity, for example, of the ownership structure. In some cases, indeed, beneficial owners control companies using long chain of legal vehicles, adopting in some cases the so-called Chinese box structure. So we have an individual that owns a company, that in turn owns another company, that in turn owns another company, and so on. And this is, I mean, complexity is not a feature suspicious and anomalous per se. Indeed, it can be explained by legitimate feature, for example, the business activity or the sector in which the company is involved or the size of or the company. However, it's important to highlight that complex ownership structures pose a challenge for authorities in the identification of the identity of the beneficial owner, and for this reason are employed from criminals in financial crime schemes. Another feature that can be spotted in looking at the entire ownership structure, as said before, is the presence of ownership links with high-risk jurisdiction, those first-level shareholders or intermediate shareholders that are registered in countries considered at higher risk. In this sense, it's important to highlight that there are other alternatives to the institutional approach, so the official black and gray list, and for the identification of countries at higher risk. And for example, probably the most famous one is the Financial Secrecy Index elaborated by Tax Justice Network. Another feature is the presence of opaque corporate vehicles, those trust, fiduciaries, investment funds, and other legal arrangements that may do not allow the identification of the beneficial owner, but also the presence of changes in the ownership structure at an unusual frequency, for example, which may be a signal of the employment of figureheads and that act on the behalf of the real owner. However, all these factors are examples, but there are several other features that can be detected by looking at the full ownership structure of a company. So in the following slides, we will see some practical cases in which these practices and these anomalous features have been exploited by criminals in the commission of different financial crimes. The first case is the so-called investigation security, which occurred between 2016 and 2017 in Italy, that revealed the infiltration of legitimate businesses in the legal economy by an organized crime group strictly related to a Cosa Nostra family, so an Italian mafia. The criminal activity was conducted by a group that was a group of individuals that were affiliated to Cosa Nostra, who controlled a large network of companies, as you can see from the image, involving figureheads and shell companies. So in particular, 3 entrepreneurs that were strictly related to the Cosa Nostra family run a consortium that you can see here in the bottom, company V, that involved several cooperatives that were active in a variety of business sectors and that were all managed using Strawman. So the group exploited this complex network of companies interconnected among each other to commit systematic tax fraud, which in turn provided a very large volume of illicit proceeds that in turn was used to financially support the Cosa Nostra family and also to financially support the commission of other crimes. So in this case, the reconstruction of the entire ownership structure allow us to detect this complex network of companies interconnected among each other, characterized by a high level of complexity that is worsened also by the employment of figureheads and shell companies that do not allow the identification of the beneficial owner. The second case regards Operation Matryoshka, that was an operation conducted by the Portugal police with the support of Europol. Basically, the operation was about a Russian organized crime group that infiltrated the football sector in Portugal. And basically, this organized crime group adopted an infiltration scheme made of 4 main steps. In the first, the criminal group identified the most vulnerable football club in Europe, aiming in the second step to make the short-term donation to these clubs to financially support them. Aiming in the third step to infiltrate this club by acquiring ownership shares using companies characterized also in this case by a complex ownership structure involving also shell companies and figureheads used to conceal their identities. So once they had gained the control over these clubs, the groups exploited them for money laundering and for illicit betting purposes. So also in this case, we have an organized crime group that exploits companies characterized by complex ownership structures and involving shell companies and figureheads to conceal their identity to commit several financial crimes. The following case takes its name from Operation Metropolis, that was an investigation carried out by the Italian financial police between 2007 and 2013 against 2 Ndrangheta groups that were involved in the construction and tourism sector in Calabria, in southern Italy. Specifically, these 2 groups were able to obtain permits to construct and sell several tourist resorts in Calabria. The investment scheme was adopted by the criminal group was that some Italian companies directly and indirectly owned by mafia members were able to obtain permits and required to construct buildings to construct residential and tourist buildings. The construction, however, was financially supported by other companies that were registered abroad, especially in Spain and Ireland, that were used to conceal basically the identity of other people linked to the two 'Ndrangheta group. So in this case, the two 'Ndrangheta group were able, on the one hand, to rely on the support of local politicians to obtain these building permits, while on the other hand, they relied on a very large network of both national and foreign figureheads that were linked to the two groups through kinship ties. In the image on the right, you can see the ownership structure of the companies, of some of the companies controlled by the two groups. Indeed, at least more than 30 companies were identified, and some of them were businesses controlled by the organized crime group and established in Italy. Others were always controlled by the organized crime group, but established abroad, as said before. But there were other companies that were controlled by colluding entrepreneurs that in some cases result to be also owner of some of these residential buildings. In this case, the most important company was this company F, which was basically a joint venture of these two groups that was managed only through Stroman, that was involved in both the construction and selling of these buildings. So also in this case, we have two organized crime groups that exploited the complex and a large network of companies to infiltrate the construction sector and employed these specific type of structures to hide their identities and their links to 'Ndrangheta. The following case study is Operation Volcano, which is an operation conducted always by the Italian police in 2014 against an organized crime group that, in cooperation with local property crime, was involved in the theft of medicines that were then resold in the legal market using some bogus wholesalers. In this case, these 13 companies and wholesalers that were involved in these illicit trades were all shell companies established mainly in Eastern European countries, in particular in Hungary, Romania, and Latvia. In this case, these companies were of two types. As said before, firms established ad hoc using figureheads. For example, there was this case, you can see here on the left, of 5 shell companies registered in different countries, but all owned by the same person, that was an Italian-Canadian individuals living in Italy that registered these companies using a slightly different first name. The other type of wholesaler were existing businesses, those companies already active, that in some cases were not involved in the pharmaceutical sector, but also in other sectors. Okay, for a matter of time, we can go to the conclusion, and we can say that okay, from these cases and all these judicial cases highlighted how beneficial and legal ownership data can be used to detect anomalies in the ownership structures that may be a signal of the involvement in financial crime schemes. In particular, we look at how all these companies involved in these cases show peculiar ownership features and employed some practices and strategies to conceal their identities. So, as said before, the presence of multi-layer ownership, so a higher distance between the company and its beneficial owner, the presence of ownership links with high risk jurisdictions, which allow a certain degree of financial and corporate secrecy, but also the employment of shell companies and figureheads, the use of trust and other legal arrangements that may do not allow the identification of the beneficial owner, and other several aspects. As said before, these are red flags that we have seen together in this judicial case, but there are many other features that can be used and detected by looking at the ownership structure of these companies. What we have to bear in mind is that the adoption of beneficial ownership register is a crucial step toward the announcement of corporate transparency, and a crucial step in the fight against money laundering and other financial crimes. However, beyond the identification of who owns a company, all these cases stress the importance also to understand how these companies are owned, and so through which legal vehicles. Indeed, by looking at the full ownership structure, we can identify some companies at higher risk of being involved in financial crimes. So adopting, in this sense, a risk assessment approach. So thank you for your attention.
If I can, thank you, Katerina. If I can just chip in to stress 2 points. So first, Katerina could go on forever in disclosing cases and investigations with these problems. We don't want to make a compilation, but we want to just to highlight, if it is necessary, that the use of complex and opaque corporate structure is more frequent than one may think. First, wrap up. Second, as said by Katerina, having the data, although the beneficial ownership registry is there, is perfect, it is ideal. Having the data there is not enough. One has really to collect and process this data in order to make it speaking and useful for your work. And this is exactly the objective of today's training. Third takeaway, so as to put it a bit in the French context before leaving to your question, if any. One of the projects which was mentioned by Katerina, Project Data Cross, sees also the involvement of French authorities, the French Anti-Corruption Authority, AFA, and I see that there is one representative of AFA in the training as well, and I think it's a very good signal. And French police is also involved in the phase 2 of the project. And this is important because also authorities are increasingly aware of the need of using this kind of risk-based approach or risk factors-based approach, or in using these red flags to identify anomalies. And I think this is exactly something which also the civil society can really benefit from. And to give another French applications and example, yesterday we had, as I mentioned, this NEBOT meeting of, so the meeting of the network of experts of beneficial ownership transparency, CSABOT, in which we presented applications, which is still working and ongoing, of analyzing the anomalies of legal person owning real estate properties in Paris. And this was possible. The paper will be disclosed and published in the next few months. But this exercise was possible by combining company data and other registers data, and in particular, the French cadastry data, which, as you know, has been published, at least some segment of this register. And this is another takeaway, which is the data is there, but in also to make it useful, to make it speaking, we need to combine this data together. Interoperability of register, interconnection of registers. And this is another issue which we will address through the training today and tomorrow. So feel free somehow to ask questions and push us and saying, okay, I know these cases, but how can we use this approach? How can we use these cases for the French context, in the French context and for our specific needs? But I mean, I wanted just to stress these things, but I leave the floor for question to Caterina and us, if any.
Alors, s'il n'y a pas de questions particulières, moi, je veux bien en poser une pour commencer. Les schémas présentés, les affaires présentées par Caterina étaient en fait extrêmement complexes. On voit qu'il y a différents paliers, différentes structures interposées. Je pense qu'il y a plusieurs juridictions également impliquées. Est-ce que pour avoir accès, est-ce que n'importe quel citoyen pourrait reconstituer cette structure, ou est-ce qu'avec une simple recherche, par exemple sur le registre des bénéficiaires effectifs en France ou ailleurs, où il faut vraiment avoir un accès plus élargi, et dans ce cas-là, un accès qui n'est pas ouvert au grand public, mais qui est ouvert à certaines personnes ou autorités limitées. Est-ce que vous avez quelques éléments de réponse sur ça?
I don't know, Michele, you want to
well, I start, but then, yeah, you can jump in. I think most of the cases that Caterina talked about started from tips and leads given by civil society representative and especially investigative journalists and researchers also. For example, in two cases, the ownership structure that you have seen was reconstructed by us as researchers, and on the basis of mainly public information or company register information or business, other business data provider. So this is to say that it is possible to do this investigation without being a law enforcement, without having access to law enforcement repositories. But of course, you need to know the sources. You need to know how to process the sources. And this is exactly, the objective of today's training. I see there are two questions right in the chat.
Yes, one question, how data cross is working. If you can just present the project, the big lines, and another regarding what are the worst countries in Europe in terms of complex structures allowed to be registered, or in terms of opacity. But if you want to ask the question yourself, Colin or Veronique, please go ahead.
Probably, Michele, you can present
I can answer on
data
data cross.
Yeah,
and you can answer the second one. Yeah, data cross is working well. So in February, data cross 2, which is the second phase, started. Said in France, we have the AFA involved. We have the French police and also the French competition authority, which, and it's a good news in my opinion, are working also very well together, in the sense that they share the approach, and what they are sharing is also risk indicators that they are using in their own activity, and they are trying to see how they can exploit this collective knowledge on anomalies on firms at French level. So I would say that this is a successful project, and somehow I think step 3 will be also to involve civil society in this respect, and I hope there will be phase 3 of the project, in which also the French journalists or NGOs can be also involved. Caterina, I leave to you as regards the countries question.
Yes, thank you for your question. Then you can find more information on the project and on these results also in the link on the that we have pasted in the chat. However, we can find different countries with respect to the indicator that we are looking at. For example, we have said that as regard complexity, there are as regard the exposure to black and grey list jurisdiction, we have Luxembourg, but also Cyprus and Malta and Belgium at the top countries analyzed, while as regard anomalous complexity, there are also Netherlands, always Luxembourg, and Malta and Belgium. However, for other specific details on how this risk distributes across countries, you can find more detail in the report. I don't know if you would like to have a specific information on it.
That's fine. It's interesting because I didn't know about Belgium. The other countries are pretty much known, but I didn't know that Belgium was in the top countries. Do you know why? Maybe it's a side question, so maybe I can save it for the chat if you want to go on with the presentation. But I was wondering why Belgium, for example, would is there a problem with the law or something very specific with the country?
I mean, in data cross report, you will find more details on Belgium too. Most of the anomalies that were detected regard certain industries, and especially as regards links with blacklisted and grey listed countries. There is some communities of some South American countries which have some investments in the Belgian sectors, and therefore somehow pops up. But I mean, we can leave it to a separate discussion if you want later on.
Okay, thank you.
Alors, je ne sais pas s'il y a d'autres questions. S'il n'y a pas d'autres questions, je peux peut-être marquer la fin de cette première session et remercier Michele et Caterina pour ces présentations qui vraiment annoncent un sujet passionnant et qui lance le ton pour ces 2 jours de formation. Nous pouvons nous retrouver dans 15 minutes pour la prochaine session avec Sophie Lemaitre qui travaille au Jour Anti-Corruption Resource Center. Sophie a un doctorat, est chercheuse et un doctorat en droit. Elle a vraiment travaillé sur les pratiques de flux financiers illicites, de détournement de fonds publics, de corruption dans le domaine des industries extractives. Et nous avons également Lucas Milan, qui est chercheur au sein du Tax Justice Network, qui a une casquette un peu plus droit fiscal, enfin un peu plus fiscal, pardon, sans le droit, plus voilà, évasion, fraude fiscale. Et je pense que ça serait une session passionnante avec vraiment deux échanges de deux parcours et deux profils très différents. Donc, je vous dis à tout à l'heure et je vous remercie pour votre attention. Donc, on pourra se retrouver dans le lobby et pareil, vous n'aurez qu'à cliquer sur la prochaine session. Merci à tous et merci à nos intervenants.